My dear friends, since last Shabbat, the eloquent witness of the Holocaust and moral conscience of our time, Elie Wiesel, died at the age of 87. And then, in back-to-back days, the shooting of 37-year-old Alton Sterling in Louisiana, followed by the police killing of Philando Castile, 32-year-old black man and cafeteria supervisor who was shot to death during a traffic stop in Minnesota. As if that wasn't bad enough, a military veteran who said his goal was to kill white police officers opened fire last night in downtown Dallas, leaving 5 officers dead and 7 wounded before the police killed him with a remote-controlled explosive delivered by a robot. The death of Elie Wiesel seems like eons ago, doesn't it? Even if it happened after services last Shabbat. But 2 of his many lifelong teachings speak to this week and to our lives. The mission of the Jew, Elie Wiesel famously said, the mission of the Jew is not to make the world more Jewish, it's to make the world more human. We must regain a sense of our shared humanity, not only in the aftermath of this week's evil acts. We must reach out like never before to those who are different than ourselves, to fulfill this Jewish mission to make the world more human. And the reason we must not withdraw into our social groups or our religious communities' comfort zones is because Elie Wiesel was right in stating a second teaching, what the enemy of our time really is. It's not terrorism or even hate. The opposite of hate, Elie Wiesel said, is not love, it's indifference to hate. Indifference, Wiesel says, is the enemy. I heard the Muslim imam at today's interfaith service in Dallas say something very similar. He said that the solution to hate is not more hate. The solution to extremism is not more extremism. The solution to injustice is not more injustice. The solution to gun violence is not more gun violence. And the solution to fear is not more fear-mongering. In this week's Torah portion, Korach, 2 distinct groups from 2 separate tribes rise up against Moses and Aaron. Korach is a first cousin of Moses and Aaron, and he challenges Aaron's right to the priesthood, whereas the second group, led by Datan and Aviram, that group questions Moses' leadership abilities. It's a dramatic power struggle in which some influential rebels try to take power from Moses, risking their lives to promote their own cause, their own self-interest, over the sacred destiny of the larger people. Their downfall is stark and dreadful. Just a preview, if you're going to attend tomorrow's Torah study with Rabbi Strauss, he can show you. These rebels literally get swallowed up by the ground in an earthquake. And yet, as Rabbi Rachel Cowan notes in her powerful essay on Korach, the Torah says in 26:11, that's the book of Numbers, that even though Korach dies, his descendants and attributes of his descendants live on. We certainly see them today. Cynical, political, religious, and other leaders cloaking self-interest in the name or the language of democracy, God, nationalism. In wielding power in such short-sighted ways, these modern-day rebels present an even greater threat to God's creation today than Korach did to Moses' leadership. This Torah portion urges us to be vigilant, on the lookout, lest such persons undermine the best of the communities we are called upon to create and sustain. What do I mean? Communities of love, acceptance, goodness, and blessing, not communities of fear, distrust, and kill or be killed. I think the greatest threat to our beloved community, whether Memphis, Dallas, or America as a whole, is not the person or persons who stoked the crowds as rebels did against Moses. Perhaps the greater threat beyond any person or persons is the culture that we are all allowing, or at the very least, condoning. You see, what doesn't change in this week's rebellion against Moses is the love and humility he feels toward the people and the higher power he serves. But that's not the case this week or this year. I think Elie Wiesel would be the first to say that what links the deaths of the Dallas officers and 2 more young black men in Louisiana and Minnesota is the uselessness of it all. I think Wiesel would also say, beware of those who will polarize humanity even further instead of bringing us closer together, no matter what our race, religion, or way of life. Korach couldn't challenge this rebel who tried to take down Moses. He couldn't change the culture of love and humility and the striving for goodness the way our Torah stands for. But we live in a time when it's not just about fear, it's a culture of fear which threatens everything, relationships and society. As one article I read years ago puts it, the only thing we have to fear is the culture of fear itself. What is a culture of fear? A culture in which people stop relating to each other freely for fear of danger. People cannot think clearly when they're afraid. Numerous studies have shown that fear distorts emotions and perceptions. It often leads to poor decisions. For people who have suffered trauma, fear messages can sometimes trigger uncontrollable fight or flight responses with dangerous ramifications. Television, film are filled with extreme violence, millions of fictional deaths far out of proportion to what happens in real life. I spoke with a young mother today. I said, "How are you?" She said, "I'm really tired." I said, "Yeah, were you up last night?" And she said that she and her husband were both on their phones at 4 o'clock in the morning. Imagine the picture, like a New Yorker cartoon, of separate parts of the bed, and each one's looking at their phone at 4 in the morning for the latest fear alert. Culture of Fear is also the name of a book by Barry Glassner, which underscores the fact that we often fear the wrong things and incredibly out of proportion to reality. For instance, did you know that statistics show you have a much higher chance of being killed by lightning than by a terrorist? A much, much higher chance. At any given moment in the United States, there are a multitude of things we might be afraid of. Zika virus, terrorist attacks, gun violence, fear of immigrants, Muslims, climate change, people of color, people different. The consciousness of fear about these and many other topics almost has no relationship with actual threat levels. And fear dominates politics, media, and human existence, doesn't it, in America? And it's getting worse. Political ads, news coverage, social media all send the constant message that people should be afraid, very afraid. And what does this fear factor breed? It only breeds more violence, mental illness, anxiety, trauma, social disintegration. Pervasive fear, as history demonstrates, ultimately paves the way, if you studied Nazi Germany, to an autocratic society, to authoritarianism with increased police power, legally codified social controls, invasion of privacy, and anxiety. I've had more pastoral appointments this summer with people who are just losing it because of this culture of fear. It leads to the scapegoating of others for the problems one faces. Let me just give you a few examples. This isn't a long service, so it won't be a long sermon. Immigrants are blamed for numerous social ills, and certainly the more than 11 million undocumented immigrants and their families, they live in fear every day. In the context of pervasive fear, large portions of the population are extremely vulnerable to fear-based messages and simply coping with their day-to-day lives. So this may make some of you feel better, but it's the fear that other people, just a few, who are vulnerable to financial insecurity, being involved with the Memphis Ministers Association and my colleagues in South Memphis, not just out here in East Memphis. I learned this week that nearly half of U.S. households live on the edge of financial collapse, with almost no savings to fall back on in the event of a job loss, health crisis, or other income-eliminating emergency. That's according to the Corporation for Enterprise Development. Things are bad or worse for those in retirement or on the brink. A third, or almost 15 million people, derive almost all of their income from Social Security retirement benefits. That's about $15,000 annually before taxes. And for most of the other two-thirds, Social Security provides over half their income. That means, let me give it in one sentence, that more than 20 million additional people live on less than $32,000 a year. And these figures are averages. They don't reflect racial differences. For instance, for every $1 white families have in savings in this country, I learned from my Memphis friends, African Americans have just 5 cents, and Latinos have 6 cents. So in terms of general poverty, 45.3 million people live at or below the poverty line. That's, by the way, $11,888 for one person. And looking at this population broken up by race, blacks account for 27%, Latinos for 23.5%. So that's more than half. Whites, Asians, others make up the rest. So when we talk about this culture of fear, realize it's not just my phone giving the Channel 5 news alert or keeping your CNN or whatever TV station you watch on. One of the great lessons from this week's episode between the great leader Moses and the ill-fated Korah is Moses' concern with the needs of all the people instead of his own power or glory. He didn't even take this attack personally. If you read the Torah, Moses approaches his accuser. He gets on the ground in humility, and he places his concern for the just cause he was leading over any concern for his own welfare. His leadership motives were pure, and in the end, that's what we remember. But what Moses had going for him in closing, which I worry we are losing, is not the presence of cynical, political, and other leaders. We've always had people who are centered on themselves, not just Korah. we have that today. What Moses had going for him, and here's the punchline, were two words. He charged to Joshua and all future leaders, and which the people bought into. What were those two words? Google them when you read the Torah. They recur over and over and over again. Al tira, which means literally, don't be afraid. Do not live in fear. That's like the bumper sticker mantra that recurs from Moses in the face of terrible, terrible evil acts. The people in Moses' time did not allow others to incite fear in the general public to achieve political goals, no matter what your persuasion. The only remaining question for our time is, will we allow that? Will we allow the culture of fear to get inside of us? Or will we remember what the Torah says? After the slain officers and young black men are laid to rest this week, I pray we'll regain our senses as a nation, reduce violence, hatred, injustice, and not let fear or extremism rule our nation, our lives, our world. Ken Yehi Ratzon, so may it be, and let us say, Amen.